how did you first monetize your podcast? What was that first dollar that you made from your show?
Sponsors, actually, which is kind of rare in the podcasting world.
Sure.
But my show grew so fast that I was able to get uh, sponsorships within 6 months. And so it wasn't a lot. I was making about $1,000 a month at first. And
That's
then
great.
when I was making money through that, I realized it wasn't going to be enough quite yet. And I started to launch my own courses and programs. And then I launched a low ticket course, and then I launched a higher ticket course and other products along with that. So the money really starts to pay off when you spend that time investing in your own courses.
Today, we are joined by speaker and podcast host of the Mind Love podcast, which has amassed over 2 million downloads. That's right, 2 with lots of zeros after it, 2 million. Very excited to chat and talk shop with Mrs. Melissa Monte. How are you?
I'm amazing. How are you?
I am quite well. I'm better now that I've got a smiling face on the other side of the screen, and I'm excited to talk about 2 really important topics: business podcasting and mental health, because I think that they're both very, very pertinent now, especially in the middle of a pandemic in 2020. So before we get into all the nuts and bolts of how to grow a podcast, I just want to ask you, in your own situation, from a mental health standpoint, how has podcasting and entrepreneurship impacted you positively or negatively?
It's really a big just part of the journey. So me figuring out what gave my life meaning and what gave me purpose each day, that was all my search for years. For a long time, I'm like, I don't even know if I have a purpose. I have too many interests. Or there was a period where I was going through some really hard times and didn't really feel interested in anything. And so there was just a lot of questioning about why I was here. And so when I started to really understand and do the work to figure out who I was, what's going to light me up, what's going to be sustainable for me, what I actually want instead of just the messaging I've received on what success looks like, that led me straight to podcasting. I love to talk. I don't necessarily like to write. I was always interested in learning about the power of the mind, because that's what got me out of those hard times I talked about. I was always just reading new things. And every time I'd learn something like, oh my gosh, we have the power to do that. Oh my gosh, not everything is out of our control. Oh my gosh, like I have the power to respond to my circumstances. All these simple things, but you can go as deep as you want with it. I was going deep and I was endlessly curious about it, but it was always my little side thing or what I would read after work. And so when I started to see how I could really combine my interests and realize I have the power to do that too, I started narrowing down a life path, and it brought me to podcasting. And I did try other things first. It's that entrepreneur search kind of. But it was through the doing when I actually started taking action and realizing, okay, I started a travel blog. That's not for me because I do not want to be telling people what to do at the end of a trip or vlogging on the top of Machu Picchu. I'd rather, this is like my escape place. So things like that I really had to learn through doing, and it gave me a better understanding of the right questions to ask before embarking on another entrepreneur journey. And so when I got to podcasting, it was just a whole different world for me, because all of my desires and my curiosity and what I wanted to do each day and how I wanted to spend my time was all kind of wrapped up into one. Plus, like if you I look into things like personality profiles and the my strength finder quizzes and stuff like that. And everything really did get wrapped up into the idea of podcasting and the kind of competitive nature of how fast I could climb the charts of things and whatever. So when I found that, it was really the first time that I could feel myself skyrocketing to success since like college. So it was really fulfilling.
Well, I think you hit on obviously a lot of really good points there. And for me, your mental health is really important, right? I mean, you could see someone smiling on social media, but they're not actually smiling on the inside, or their personal life is not that great. But I think that when you start trying these new things and finding your purpose, it makes all the difference in the world. I remember a time where I was just being really rude to a server at a restaurant, and I was like, I had to look at myself. I didn't feel that sense of contentment or personal accomplishment or any sort of purpose, right? Because you're waking up, you're going to a job that you're not enthusiastic about, and that to me is really what being an entrepreneur and side hustling is about, right? You're getting out there in your after hours, and you're putting in that extra work. And I'm with you there with podcasting. It's meant a lot to me as well. So I'm kind of curious. You're starting your podcast, okay? You've started it. You love it. You're having a lot of fun podcasting. Did you experience pod phase? Did you get that like that little honeymoon phase at the beginning? How did it feel after 90, 180 days in?
For me, it was still a lot of fun. I didn't really have that lull. I got it about a year and a half in, but
Well,
it
when did you
wasn't
start? I'm curious. When did you originally start?
the December 2017.
Okay.
And so for me, what was really helpful is a lot of people have the goal of starting the podcast. And so that's why the honeymoon phase is over, because they've reached their milestone and it's that success hangover, or you've already finished the goal and you haven't yet found your next goal. So for me at that time, I was still setting milestones for myself. So it was still that little personal competitive nature within myself, just trying to beat my own stats, trying to find new ways to expand my reach. And so the first year, especially, I was really focused on growth and I was trying to think outside the box. Like, I would Google the top 10 ways to grow your podcast, and then I would find whatever was not on the list that I could think of and do that instead. And so
Okay.
I was trying to find the things that everyone else wasn't doing, or that weren't just I find the deeper I get into marketing, the more I find that a lot of the regurgitated stuff you find on the top page of Google is just other people regurgitating things that they haven't yet done. And so I was just trying to think of new ways, because podcasting, even though it's been around for a while now, is still a newer medium. And so there's still different opportunities. Other companies are still trying to jump on the bandwagon by starting new apps and starting new websites and starting new list sites and whatever it is. And so there's still a lot of opportunity to find growth hack ideas that are not yet being used. And that's what I was focused on. And it kept it really, really fun for me. When I got that podcasting lull, or I started to lose my fire, it was when I also stopped doing all the things. And I think that happens with mental health too. And what I mean by that is, we're like, okay, well, I need to fix my life. So I'm going to start meditating and I'm going to start doing this, or I'm going to start setting goals and structure my days. And then we get complacent or comfortable and we let one at a time go.
Yeah.
And so anytime I've ever experienced a lull, I've had to reflect and act like I was starting at the very beginning of my journey and say, what do I need right now? What am I lacking? How can I bring that to myself? Whenever I think that something outside of myself needs to change for me to be happy, I know I'm doing it wrong. It's always something inside myself. It's not somebody or something or your circumstances or where you live or whatever. It's always just, how can I how can I embrace this within myself, or make some sort of change to my mindset or the way I'm looking at this, and then have that guide me on anything else I need to change. That way I'm not just chasing one thing to the next without and finding the same problems wherever I go.
Yeah, I'm a huge believer in just focusing on yourself and just trying to be a little bit better than yesterday. That's kind of the way that I see it, because it's really easy to compare yourself to people that have been doing something for 5 years or 10 years, or maybe they just caught fire, right? Just be a little bit better than yesterday and you'll be amazed at what happens. Hey, Mark here. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to smash that like button for the YouTube algorithm. Let YouTube know you're enjoying this video. Let me know you're enjoying this video. All right, let's get back into this episode. So I want to kind of circle back. Melissa Monte, host of the Mind Love podcast, over 2 million downloads. What are your top 3 tips so that all the great podcasters out there can get more downloads? What would you say?
The first thing is using whatever resources you have to actually ask people to share. So the two things that come to mind is saying in your podcast to share, how to share, and who to share it with.
Mm,
I found when I started doing that, the amount that I would see my show get shared on Instagram or whatever like skyrocketed because I would actually say, if you know somebody that needs this, and an example that I like to use is I did one on breakups. And so I get people to think of a person in their mind, because once they think of a person in
Mhm.
their mind, they have to share it. That's how word of mouth works really well. So I'm like, we all know that person who's still reeling over their ex. Tap the share button and be specific. Tap the share button, send it to her via text message, whatever, as specific as you can get. And once they already outline that path, then it makes it a lot more realistic that they're going to do that. And it's the same with anything. It's like with your own goals. When you're like, I got to start a podcast, it's easy to put off. But if you actually had already brainstormed the list of all the things that you needed to do, you're much more likely to do it.
Yeah.
So think about those same little mindset tricks you use with yourself, and try to relay them to the people you are trying to get to act. The other one I think about is your actual guests. So ask them, will you please share this podcast? Share the link with them. Say it's really helpful for the growth of the show. Give a little reasoning. Don't give them the guilt trip. I've actually been on a podcast where somebody's like, you like, they made me like sign a contract to share it. And
Wow.
I was just so, I don't know. It was something about it turned me off so much. I was like, I don't know. And I ended up putting off that interview and I never did it. It was just a little too aggressive, and I would have shared it. I love sharing
I
other
mean,
people's stuff. You
I
know what I
can
mean?
understand that, but it definitely, I could see how it could rub me the wrong way, because it's frustrating when you put in all the effort and the time to bring on a great guest
Oh,
and
yeah.
hours of editing, and then you send them the link and they just ignore you, or they unfollow you on Instagram. It's like, thanks, I appreciate it. Thanks for thanks for the
I
support.
know.
Yeah.
I know. And I feel that pain too. But at the same time, it's like, I don't know. It's just like a little uncouth for me, especially
Yeah.
because this was a brand new show. They had 5 episodes, and I'm like, and you want me to sign a contract? Like, I will, but you can just ask people nicely. It's like with anything. And so, but what I like to do is, especially for the bigger guests that I feel like are less likely to share it with their whole feed, what I'll do afterwards is I'll send them a little thank you with the link
Mhm.
and a $10 Starbucks gift card, and just say thank you for your time. Here's a little gift of my appreciation for spending an hour with me, and then do the ask. And they will almost always share because you've given a little first. And
Mhm.
so that's what I mean about just asking. What energy are you bringing to that ask is going to make all of the difference. Not like, you better, because this has spent me a lot, took me a lot of time to do.
Right.
So yeah, actually ask and be specific with what you're asking. Give a little why and bring some heart and warmth to it. And then the other thing is to think about. I follow the podcast trends, and so I will see the new podcast apps that are popping up. I will go to the podcasting conferences when they're allowed to be held. And I will build relationships with people in the podcasting industry. And once you do that, you start to see little opportunities for, like, hey, I'm making friends with the Stitcher guy. And so
Mhm.
then I'm going to keep in contact with him regularly. And then when I have a really big guest on, I'm going to reach out to that person and say, "Hey, can this episode be promoted?" So little things like that, where you're really being strategic with your relationships, and that can be your guests, that can be people in the podcasting industry, that can be other entrepreneurs that you know. So being really proactive with relationships has been really helpful as well.
Yeah, and it's, I think, very, I don't want to say easy to do, but by being in the podcast field, building relationships becomes much more natural because you have a value to give, right? And I couldn't agree with you anymore, Melissa. Those little things go a long way. I love the idea about the $10 Starbucks gift card. That's just gold. That's gold. And certainly not something that everyone does. Most people won't. So I like that. I like that a lot.
And you don't need to do it with everyone. Just do it with the bigger names, or like
Sure.
the ones that you really want to share. And so I know for a lot of people, that's like an extra $40 a month. Maybe they can't afford that. But again, strategy.
Yeah, I mean, the alternative is maybe we're going to advertise on Facebook with Facebook ads, but it sounds to me like what you're really a big fan of and what's really helped you light fire is word of mouth, right? And your listeners sharing with their friends, your big guests sharing with their people. It's that word of mouth kind of natural fit influencer type marketing, which I'm a big fan of. You also mentioned something else, keeping up the newest trends, the newest programs. Chartable is a program I like a lot. I like to integrate that with Buzzsprout, which I'm using. What's another app or technology that you really like in podcasting right now?
I love apps in general. I actually just cleared out my phone, but I had over 1,000 apps on my phone. I
Whoa.
used to design them. I used to design and build them, and so I was like the UX expert for past companies and marketing apps. And so I learned what I learned from how apps grow or apps actually climb the top of the charts. I used that same kind of thing in podcast growth.
Mm.
And so I'll get into that in a second, but some of the things that I learn through is I subscribe to like Pod News and Podcaster Insights. They're two really popular newsletters, and they will announce the different technologies coming out. And so it's not necessarily that I cling to one of them, but I give all of them a try. Example, there was this podcasting app that came out called Synth, and it shows a new way to share podcasts, and it'll like take clips from podcasts automatically. And and I reached out to them when nobody else was a part of it, and I asked for my podcast to be included, even though they were only putting top podcasts up there. So then the people that joined that app thought mine was a top podcast at that time.
I
And
love, yeah.
so it may or may not, something may or may not happen with it, but oftentimes it takes 20 minutes tops. And I just have like usually take my Fridays for that or something like that to just be a little bit more playful with my work. And I will try new things and just sort of see what sticks, see which things grow. And that same thing happened to me with Castbox. I built a strong relationship with them, asked to be featured when I met them at a podcasting conference, and I did spend a good amount of time on editing to make a few of my shows sound totally unique so that when I did pitch them, then I had something unique to pitch and a reason
Mm.
why and all of these other things and somebody that I knew in the company. And so then they featured me, and that was another way that it helped grow right when they were doing a push of their app. And so again, some of them, nothing's happened at all, but other ones, it's really helped give me a boost at the right time. And so it's just that willingness to play a little.
Yeah, so I mean, it sounds like you have that entrepreneurial spirit in you, Melissa, because you're going out and you're making these connections. I think that's just absolute gold, and that's not something that people talk about. When people talk about promoting their podcasts, it's typically post on Instagram or post little audiograms and stuff like that. But you're actually connecting with the people and the businesses that are making waves in the industry, which is super super smart. What's your favorite conference, by the way? What's your favorite conference? I'm curious.
Podcast movement. I also
Podcast.
really like Podfest. It's a smaller one, so it's easier to build tight relationships, but Podcast movement was the first one I spoke at, so it'll always hold a place in my heart.
Very, very cool. Very cool. How did you land a speaking gig? I know that's something all the podcasters, that's our dream, is to be on stage and to be speaking. How did you land that speaking engagement?
I was invited. Actually, I was that was because of the relationship I built with Castbox. They were
Mm,
doing a panel where Jordan Harbinger was hosting it on podcast growth, and I told them, again, I'm just very blunt with the things I'm working towards, and I'm like, "Hey, if you have any connections, I'm getting into speaking, and I was doing a big public speaking mastermind program that I invested a lot of money into so I could practice that. And I was like, I'm investing a lot of money in speaking. That's where I want my career to go. If you come across any opportunities, let me know. And not many people say stuff like that. And so when they had this opportunity, I was randomly invited. So I got to speak on stage with Jordan Harbinger. That was where I got to build a relationship with him. He's still a friend now. And then the following year, Pat Flynn invited me up to uh, join a panel on at his
mhm.
keynote. And again, it's all about the relationship. So when I was launching my podcast, I when I first made the decision to do it, Pat Flynn announced his first podcasting course. So I thought the best way to build a relationship with a top entrepreneur is to first invest in them,
Yeah.
especially his very first course. So I follow the top influencers that I like. I follow their courses. When they launch a new one, I like to be the person in that group, and then I give it my all and I make myself seen in that. And so at the time, he was offering the regular digital course, or you could invest more money in the in-person one. At the time, I put it all on my credit card. I did not have the money to do that, but I did it anyways because I knew it would be a good investment. And I became friends with Pat Flynn there. And then I made sure I was the star student in that launch group so that he would be invested in my success as well. And so it's really spending time with those relationships and not just taking a course, but getting to know the people putting on the course and giving back to that. And I didn't ask for anything from him. I shared his course and I talked about his course on my podcast and I told him when I did so. So I would reach out and be like, hey, I'm sending this person to you, whatever. And so the more that you give to people, the more willing they are just to naturally give back, you'll just start to see opportunities flow back.
I love that. And it feels, I mean, this may be not popular, but it feels better to give than to receive a lot of times, right? Give that.
It does. It
I'm
does.
actually part of Pat's SPI Pro group. And to your point, I never would have had access to him before. But when I joined the SPI Pro group, he was doing like a much more intimate style group coaching with the people in there. And I was able to ask him a question. He answered. He came on my show. And he talked about a lot of these same things you're talking about. The 20% itch rule is something he brought up in our episode as well, where one day a week he just focuses on thinking outside the box and trying these different types of ideas like you're doing with your podcast. Of course, we're talking to Melissa Monte here from the Mind Love podcast, over 2 million downloads. Get your mind right. Melissa's going to help you with that. So we've talked a lot about growing your audience, about growing your network. But Melissa, I also, listen, this is the After Hours Entrepreneur. We want to leave our day jobs. We want to go all in what we're doing. So I'm kind of curious, what was your first paid, how did you first monetize your podcast? What was the first dollar that you made from your show?
Sponsors, actually, which is kind of rare in the podcasting world.
Sure.
But my show grew so fast that uh, I was able to get sponsorships within 6 months. And so it wasn't a lot. I was making about $1,000 a month at first. And
That's
then
great.
when I was making money through that, I realized it wasn't going to be enough quite yet. And I started to launch my own courses and programs. And then I launched a low ticket course and then I launched a higher ticket course and other products along with that. So the money really starts to pay off when you spend that time investing in your own courses. I will say at the time I had a lot of fear around that. Like there was fear of choosing my niche, really. I
Mm.
went broad where a lot of people are like narrow down, which is the smart thing to do. I would even recommend for people to do that. But again, my biggest frustration at that time of launching was even figuring out what I wanted to do with my life. My interests were so broad. So determining just mindset, that's broad in general, but I was able to use that first year of experimenting to learn more about myself and kind of pivot from there. If I were to do it again, I would go narrow and then expand to broad. But I am lucky that I had enough passion and just the willpower, I guess, to keep showing up day after day and be creative that it worked out for me going broad to narrow. But I will say I did it the hard way.
Yeah. Well, and I when I look at podcasts, when I work with clients, there's by far that is the most common thing, going too wide too quick. I'm even guilty of it to an extent. I'm kind of consistently narrowing down. Um, but the way I see it is, as you start listening to what your fans want, when you start listening to the questions that you're getting, and you try to figure out where you're at, you kind of slide into that nice niche. But it's kind of scary to do that, because you're like, well, what about all these other people that I'm ostracizing? All these other people
Mhm.
aren't. I'm not gonna be able to serve them. But if you're not you got to pay bills, right? You got to do it. You got to do it. So let's talk a little about the sponsorship. How did you find your first sponsor? Did they reach out to you, Melissa? Or did you find them? Did you reach out and touch them? How did you find your first sponsor?
I built a relationship with a company that connected me with sponsors. And then I was working with two independent people. I've moved companies a couple different times. Now I've landed on one that I really love. But that way I don't have to think about those things. I do have a
Yeah.
very specific set of rules for who I want to sponsor. I'm a very picky person when it comes to all non-toxic, organic, clean ingredients. I want things that are actually there to better your life and aren't gimmicks and aren't going to, so I I'm very choosy about who my sponsors are, but I do let other people do that work for me. I have reached out to probably 20 different sponsors and I just send an email. I have pitch emails. Again, anytime you're asking for anything, you need to write it like a pitch deck. So if whether you're asking for a guest or you're asking for a sponsor, have your validation in there. Give them some love first, like show them that there is a relationship there, or that you are really invested in their brand or what they're teaching or whatever. And so I write good emails when I'm reaching out to anybody. And I have been able to score a lot of those, especially since it has been personal, but then I still connect them with my sponsorship team.
Yeah, how personal do you get in your emails? Because that's always a balance because you probably I think to be successful in this line of business, you have to send out 100 no's to get you have to get 100 no's to get that yes, right? But at the same time, if you're not personal enough, they're not actually going to read your email. How personal do you get in your emails?
Only about 2 to 3 sentences of real
Yeah.
personal. And the first sentence is really about, um, them really, like, whether it's I'll use an example of reaching out to maybe a best-selling author or something like that. It's like, "Hey, I'm a huge fan of your book, blah, blah, blah. I've been following you for this many years," whatever it is, what is your relationship with them? Why do you want them? And then I write how it's affected my life in 1 to 2 sentences. And so some of the people that I love that I didn't think I'd be able to get so early on was one of my favorite authors is Paul Selig. He's has like 12 best-selling books at this time. Um and Aubrey Marcus, he flew me out to
Mhm.
Austin for a show once, which was really kind of him. And so just some of the people that I had been following for a long time, I reached out with gave them a little bit of love and then I gave validation. And so before I had validation with my podcast stats, I used the validation I had from other areas of my life. Like it might be maybe you have a marketing background and I've accomplished this, this and this and my next adventure is podcasting. I I expect this to be a top 100 podcast by the end of the year. I did expect that, and it actually was. So I wasn't lying at all. But yeah, definitely don't lie, but be bold. I worked with a lot of men in my last job, and I noticed how the difference of the female CEOs compared to the male CEOs in a lot of different cases. And my CEO in particular, his pitch decks were like, "This is what we project this to be." And I'm like, "We've been around for 2 months. How do you know this?" And so he's like, "Well, because of this, this, and this." And so I used whatever validation I had in my life and just went in confidently. And then I acted on that validation as well so that it did come true. And those things go a long way. I mean, people just tend to read the numbers. They
Mm,
I got multiple people right back and they were just like, "I like your attitude. I feel like you're going to go somewhere. Sure, I'll do the interview." So, things like that. And then a little bit about what they can expect. And especially if you're trying to get people on your show, have a booking link. It's
right.
so frustrating even for me and I'm not even as busy as some of these other people where it's like, "Yeah, just let me know what your available times are." And like half the times those will just get buried because I don't have time to go through my my calendar and like tell you 20 different time slots. So, yeah, and then just say interviews will be held via Squadcast or Skype or whatever. It'll last about 45 minutes. Let me know and I'll get you on the schedule or I'll send you my booking link or something like that. And those things have worked out really well.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, are you a natural born salesperson or did you just kind of develop this skill over time? Because you're exactly right. Don't focus on what you don't have. If you're a new show and you don't have tons of listens, or if you're a new business, you don't have tons of sales, focus on what you do have, the optimism. And I love the idea of focusing on what your expertise is pre-podcasting. You say, hey, this is what I've done before. This is what I'm about to do. So get on
Yeah.
board while you still can. There have definitely been some guests that bailed on me. I'm like, okay, that's cool. I might remember that in 2 years when you really want to get on the show. Listen, you can put ego behind, but at the same time, I think it's good to have a little bit of a chip on your shoulder because not everyone's going to. I mean, I'm assuming in your case, was everyone like on board with you? Said, you know what, I'm going to be a professional podcast. That's what I'm going to do. Or did people look at you like you're crazy?
Of course, I think people always look at you like you're crazy, but I also understand that the way people react to my journey is the same way that they react to their own. So
Mm,
when I had somebody come and be totally skeptical that I could quit my job and do my what I love to do and make money from it, them being not supportive is just the exact same way that they are reacting to their own dreams. And so for me, I just kind of feel compassion about that
mm.
and it doesn't really affect me.
I love that. That is a great segue into our rapid fire section of the show, Melissa. Fantastic. Of course, we're talking to Melissa Monte from the Mind Love podcast. Check it out. You will definitely enjoy it. All right, Melissa, you ready for the rapid fire?
Yes.
Buckled up, getting ready. Let's Do it. What is a must-have item for less than 50 bucks?
I think a paper planner. Those have when I finally stopped using the digital tools and got a paper planner, I swear my productivity skyrocketed.
I like that. You'd be surprised how many people say pen and paper. It is probably 50 to 60% of answers. So I'm with you there. If you had 10 seconds with yourself 10 years ago, Melissa, what would you say?
Be kinder. Be kinder to yourself. I was really hard on myself 10 years
Mm,
ago, and it didn't serve me at all.
mm. What is a must-have subscription? What's a subscription you could not do without?
My subscription to Insight Timer meditation app. It is my most used app. I love it, and it's the best meditation app out there, even the free version.
I'm curious, follow up rapid fire. How many times a day do you meditate and for how long?
It depends. I've fallen off the bandwagon a good amount of times, but I almost always meditate for 20 minutes in the morning, and then I will take mini breaks throughout the day whenever I feel a negative emotion or overwhelmed or stuck or unproductive. I'll just take a few moments to gather my thoughts, and usually I can work through it.
Love it. Love it. You mentioned that you love apps. What is a must-have social media app? If you could only have one app on your phone, what's the social media app you would have?
Oh, I'm so embarrassed to say that it's TikTok. I really
Oh,
love consuming TikTok, but I actually don't even create for TikTok, which is why it's kind of
it's
embarrassing. But
dangerous.
I've deleted. It is. I've deleted all of my social media apps since COVID because I found myself getting too in the hole, and it again wasn't serving me. I need to be a creator, not a consumer, and it's just hard. So now I still will go to the website, but I have to actually type in facebook.com or whatever to post my business stuff. It helps me to be a lot more intentional with it.
I like that. That's really smart. Not bleeping and blipping you.
But I guess I'm going to change it. I'm going to say Planoly. It's still a social media app. It's how you can plan all your Instagram stuff without getting caught in the in the rabbit hole. So
I like that. But listen, TikTok's a lot of fun. No judgment here.
so much
It's a
fun,
it's
especially when they get your algorithm.
right. It's like I don't want to get too vulgar, but you could spend a lot of time in the restroom if you get into a TikTok rhythm. It's interesting. All right, cool. Final question here for you, Melissa. If you had a billboard message that could reach millions of people today, what would you say?
Give your mind a little love today.
I like that.
I think we all need that reminder. It's the slogan of my podcast. So it would serve two purposes. But I think, again, we try to overpower our minds or we beat ourselves up for the thoughts we have when I think it's more about unity and integration and just being compassionate with those thoughts. And that's how you're going to move through them and make positive changes.
Melissa said it. I agree with it. Go love your mind a little bit more today. Melissa, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching. I'm glad you enjoyed this episode. I've got several other episodes right here for you. Smash one of these videos to make sure that you don't miss out on the tips, tools, and tactics of industry experts. Let's take that side hustle full time. Smash one of these links.